I'm Joey Only, Caribbean Weather Dude, and welcome to the Danger Tree Ass micro course. So today what I'm going to do is teach you all about danger tree assessment. Wildfires in British Columbia, we make sure our crews are safe from the dangers of falling trees and overhead hazards and things like that. We never go into a fire without having the area assessed for overhead hazards first. So for those of you who work in fire, maybe you're not a danger tree assessor, or maybe you want to be, this is still important stuff to know. And for all of you who just want to know about things that are wildfire related and get educated on them, there's a lot of things here that you'll find important for your own life. So here's the Danger Tree Ass micro course. And this was developed by Nick, who's the company owner at Carmana Wildfire, the new company I work for. Uh, I'm wearing my last company sweater today, Interior Tree Falling. Shout out to all you guys, Duzak and Dubs and Wyatt, and to everybody who might be watching who's part of ITF. I'm going to miss all you brothers, love you. I'm doing something different now for my own reasons. My own reasons being that I want to develop a crew right here in Wells, and that's what Nick and I are working on. So as the years go on, we're going to start this year. I'm going to have, you know, this is where my crew is based out of now, officially. So the goals in today's presentation, we want to identify the things in trees that are signs of it having poor health and structural defects, things that might cause limbs to break off or cause the tree to fall and kill or injure people who might be working in the area. The one thing we don't want to do is go into an area and look at every tree and be like, okay, that one looks bad, that one looks bad, that one looks bad, cut them all down, and then realize after that we cut down an osprey nest, right? So we make no work zones around areas that are clearly wildlife areas and try to defend that area. So this course will not make you a certified danger tree assessor. The reason why I'm studying this course today personally is because I have to renew mine on May 4th and 5th up in Prince George. So here's a good chance for me to get caught back up on my DTA stuff. As a crew boss, I don't always find myself being the guy with the DTA book in there anymore, but still being the danger tree assessor, every crew needs one. And it means I can go anywhere in the fire I want to, scouting wise, right? So I like having that ticket for all the reasons, and my crew is always safer with me and my knowledge armed to be paying attention all the time. This should help your situational awareness. Hopefully, if those of you who want to become danger tree assessors, this will help you learn how to use the DTA book so that you can make a safe decision or a fail decision on any particular tree. And once you identify these hazards, learn what sort of things you can do to mitigate them, whether that's making no work zones or having fallers come in or whatever. So a dangerous tree is any tree, whether it's alive or dead, that is a hazard to the workers. Maybe its location or its lean is bad. You know, it's like it's leaning like this, and it's got fire burning around at the roots, and here's a bunch of guys and we got to work right here. So its location is a problem. If it had that same thing going on, except we're on this side of the tree, its location is relatively safe to us. We don't need to be on this side of the tree for any reason. So maybe we'll put some ribbon around that area just to be like, oh, hey, just so your eyes see before you walk in there. Looking for physical damage on trees that may be signs that the tree will give or break. Overhead hazards would be another example of this. Widow makers. This is important stuff. I was on a fire with our Type 2 crew back in 2019. And I said to one of the ministry guys, hey, there's a widowmaker over your head. And he's like, okay, thanks. So a minute later or two, I said, yeah, just so you know, there's that widowmaker right over your head. And I walked away and I heard him say to the woman ministry firefighter, who I think was a year 2 or 3, what's a widowmaker? And she said, and I remember just thinking like, my God, who let you into the forest and you don't even know what a widowmaker is? And I'm not trying to talk down ministry guys, because some of these rookies end up becoming really good firefighters and they have to learn the ropes just like you do, right? So take that, don't take it for granted that everybody out there, no matter their rank or what color shirt they're wearing, has all the experience yet. Some of those firefighters need to get that experience, need to learn those things, and they start early in the season. You get on your first fire with them. Don't be too shocked if a couple of those, they're college people who have never done something like this before, and that's fine. And then what happens is some of them become lifers and they become battle hardened warriors, like many of the ministry firefighters are. We have top quality firefighters in British Columbia. Do not kid yourself just because I make a reference like that. Deterioration of limbs, stem, and root system. So that would be an example of the widowmaker, the deterioration of the limb. If the stem of the tree is, seems like it's going to give, or the roots, like certain trees especially, are very prone to, if they lose one root, the whole tree is doomed to fall over. Spruce are the guiltiest party for that. So when you first get to a fire and you got to assess what's going on, that's when a DTA has to happen for sure. And especially you're the first crew there, someone's got to go and make sure that things are safe in there. You can't just rush in with water and be like, here we go. You have to have a good idea of the bigger picture and the smaller picture prior to anyone going into that area. So here's one we're going to look at for a second. If since the previous assessment, BUI values are above thresholds and there is continuous burning. So for some of you, what does BUI threshold mean? That refers to these things here, the Canadian Forest Fire Weather Index System. So we'll skip over a bunch of these. Buildup Index is a numeric rating of the total amount of fuel available for combustion. How much stuff is there available to burn? And it's based on the DMC, the Duff Moisture Code, we'll look at that in a second, and the DC, the Drought Code. The BUI is generally less than twice the DMC value in moisture code, and the DMC layer is expected to help prevent burning and material deeper down in the available fuel, right? So what's the Duff Moisture Code? It's a numeric rating of the average of moisture content, loosely compacted organic layers of moderate depth. This code gives an indication of fuel consumption in moderate duff layers and medium-sized woody material. The Drought Code, numeric rating of average moisture content of deep compact organic layers. So these codes are useful indicator of seasonal drought effects on forest fuels and the amount of smoldering and deep duff layers in large logs. So the Duff Moisture Code and the Drought Code, if there's a big change in those, the big change in the buildup index, we better reassess trees that we thought were safe. If there's been 3 days since the last time someone checked, it's best to go, if you're in an area and you're working in that area lots, you got to check those trees frequently, regularly, and get into the habit as a crew just to walk in and everyone have a look around, heads up, and talk about it. If work activities recommence after the previous assessment and work activities had been completed, so same kind of thing. Maybe 3 days have passed and maybe someone's coming back to work the area, whatever. If the level of disturbance is different from the initial intended work activity, so what does level of disturbance mean? We'll talk about that soon. That's like, it's kind of like predicting the future. Like, well, what do we expect to do here? Well, we're going to put a helipad here. Okay, we better really look at everything around here, cut all the trees back, make sure everything's safe, make sure branches, we got trees that have branches too close to propellers, they'll come flying off, aren't there. There's a whole different level. Oh, we're going to have a camp here and we're all going to sleep here. That's a different level of disturbance. Well, we're just going to walk through and patrol the area. That's pretty much, you can kind of just, as you go through on your patrol, keep your heads up and keep talking about these kind of things. The best thing you can do as a crew is, I yell at my guys, don't stare at each other as you're walking around talking. If you're going to talk, and don't cut off all of your attention span, at least, at least keep your head moving and your eyes moving. Otherwise you just get drawn into this, and that's just common. So you want to make sure that, if you think there's a possibility there's going to be a helipad there, that's the extreme example, right? But make sure you do the highest level of inspection. If the tree doesn't look visually suspect, then you don't need to spend a lot of time on it, right? So you got to be able to identify what trees are healthy and normal and going to be fine, and then also which ones have burning going on underneath the ground around them. So here's what we're just talking about. Level of disturbance. VLR is a very low risk. So that's recon, that's a patrol. You're going to flag a trail through for maybe where you're going to have a hose lay from a water source. So, you might be going back and forth in that trail a little bit, but does anyone intend to be just standing in that location? No, actually, because the water source is way down here and we're working way up here. So it's like, what's the level of disturbance for that trail? a hose lay in the green, so it's like in green stuff. You know, you make sure your hose lay is good. If it's LOD1 is when you're actively engaging in mop up and chainsaw operations. So that's when you're like, okay, we're going to be here for a while in this spot working. That's the number one level of disturbance. Number two, three is a manned pump site or falling operations. So a manned pump site being like down that trail to where our water source was, that's where our pump is. And whatever guy's sitting down there, he's got his headphones on or his ear muffs on because it's like all day with that Mark III pump just blasting loud, and it's gonna eat your attention up. And it's hard to pay attention to every little blast of the wind. You got to make sure that man pump site is a completely safe place to work. And areas where you expect that, you know, if a helicopter is going to be coming and dumping where you guys are going to be working, well, you better make sure that the trees are looked at a little more carefully. And LOD4, that's medium and heavy helicopter rotor wash staging areas. So that's, you know, where everyone meets in the morning, where the incident commanders may have their tent or something like that. Fire camp where everyone's staying and sleeping. You know, you're never going to have a situation where a tree falls out of the blue on a bunch of people camping at a large BC wildfire camp, right? So when you assess the site, so you got to look at the history of the stand and what kind of tree it is, what kind of trees they are, what's and as you look through them, you know, is there a pattern of tree failure in this particular area, right? So that's an indicator. That's a clue. Stand age, the structure of the stand, the type of fuel it is, right? So, you know, is it a stand of poplars or is it a stand of pine? These are important things. Has it been recently disturbed? What's the soil and slope instability and things like that if it has been, right? Other things we want to be aware of is flooding possibilities. Where is the water table, right? So you could put someone down in a narrow canyon on a pump site and in a flash flood situation have your pump get completely, you know, be aware of that kind of stuff, right? Where decayed roots. So that's one of it. You're working near water or in a wet area where it's swampy. Are those trees, you know, and you can just go and kick them over. Okay, there's a few that are like that. Maybe we better pay attention to everything in here. What's the potential for wind damage? What will the prevailing winds do? You know, and if depending on where everything is in the particular area you have to work. So, and we were talking before, saturated and shallow soils, that might help with decaying roots, right? And recent exposure. So these are things that could affect trees. Certainly we found that if you cut a bunch down and leave three standing, those three standing often get blown over. What's the severity of the burn? You know, how bad is this fire? What kind of fire is it? Is it like, you know, a creepy crawly ground fire and no one's seen any active flame or active burning? Or is this like an area where a rank 6 fire has just gone through and probably every tree that's been touched by fire is dangerous to work underneath? What's the condition of the crown, the top of the trees? That tells you a lot. You know, look at them, look at the crown of the tree. I mean, that's kind of like its face. And chlorosis, structural defects then are like hazardous tops, like the top of the tree might come off. It has maybe broken limbs that are dead, and you know, or maybe there's a big witch's broom, a clump of stuff up in there, and that witch's broom could come dislodged or could lead to weight that might leave the tree. Is there a big split right down the middle of the chunk? What's the damage of the stem itself? You know, is it all full of holes and decay? Is there fungal bodies all over that stem and butt and cankers and different kinds of sickness? Is the bark sloughing off? Is the tree leaning? And what are the condition of the roots? You know, and so we'll dig in sometimes and find the roots. I mean, usually, I mean, honestly, how often do I dig in and check the roots on trees? Generally, if I really think, if I'm getting to that point, you know, then I'm being really picky. I've probably already decided by then that this tree's no good. So, but that's something you do need to learn, is to dig into those roots and feel the solidness of them and know what they are, right? You know, here's a blurry picture of a hazardous top that my face is sort of over. You got this sort of fork in the trees, and it's a multi-stem, several stems of the tree. Maybe one has a chance to break off. They have structural weaknesses because of the nature. A tree likes to be tall and straight. That's what it is. A suspect or defective top section of a tree that may be hazardous because of a visible structural weakness. If there's evidence of decay or cracking, the defect length is defined by the point of visible stem deformation, swelling and goiters and spikes and multi-tops, candelabra, fork and kinks, and other such deformities. Stem damage that makes the top prone to failure. Dead and broken limbs. Here you got a guy just hanging up there, and he's going to come down on somebody. Is it 10 centimeters in diameter? 15 centimeters for cedar? Well, if it is, then it's going to come down with enough force to seriously injure somebody if it hits them in the head or whatever, right? So these are real threats. You know, how many people, it's crazy, but way more people in BC are killed by trees and falling stuff like that than they are by bears. So, you know, keep always in mind what the real dangers of the wilderness are. The real dangers are everything. Be aware of everything. You got to learn to look up. Here's got a witch's broom up there. It's a deformity where dense mass of shoots grows from a single point. Looks like a bird's nest. It can be caused by fungus, insects, and virus. It can be, if it's 1 meter in diameter on live or dead branches, does it have evidence of decay, cracking, or failure? Do you think that if a strong wind comes, that big clump of witch's broom is going to come down on someone's head? Here we have a split trunk, an obvious looking tree that's been bolted together to keep it standing, right? So here's an example of a tree that if there wasn't big bolts in it, and you know, it could, given a strong wind, split right down the middle. 2 centimeter wide split. If it extends 25% of the tree diameter, and evidence of decay, especially around it, 50% for cedar, and some of that here includes frost damage, lightning strike damage. So always keep in mind, a lot of trees get struck by lightning, right? So that's something to be cognizant of. Wind and impact induced cracks. Here's some stem damage. This is a very dangerous tree. 50% of the cross-sectional area is damaged, burned, rotten, scarred, or fractured. 25% on deciduous trees. That is clearly a tree that you know, you would not want to have sitting on the wind side of your house. Here's a canker. Dead, you know, look at this thing. Dead portions of the cambium and bark on branches or the main stem. So cankers can be raised and sunken, sometimes surrounded by a raised lip of tissues. 50% of butt or stem circumference as a perennial canker face. You know, look at that. That's clearly an unhealthy situation in that tree. So as a form when a pathogen and insects colonize the cambium tissue under the bark. The cambium tissue eventually dies and the bark adjacent to the infected cambium becomes sunken, discolored, cracked, and sloughed off. Fungus, heart rot fungus present indicates a dangerous tree, you know, and that fungus can be right in the middle. And you find this especially with cedar trees. You cut into them and most of the tree is the outside and the rest is rotten in the middle. Heart rot, it's a fungal disease that causes the decay of wood in the center of the trunk and branches. It ruins the structure of the wood and makes it prone to breaking. Nesting cavities in trees, well, these are a good indicator of heart rot, right? So if there's birds nesting in big holes in a tree, well, why did that hole get there in the first place? Sap rot on trees, less than 60 centimeters, 30 centimeters on Douglas fir. Sap rot typically follows the death of the bark and cambium and will eventually spread into the heartwood. So, you know, that's the rot. If it stands 2 to 6 meters above a conch and 1 to 4 meters below, so those are things you want to really look for. It means it's really taken on. Here's some different sap rots on a Douglas fir. Here's some heart rot. Sloughing bark, just big chunks of bark. They're separating from the tree and falling off. The tree trunk, it's obviously a tree that's not well, if it's still alive at that point. So 10 to 15% of the tree lean. Think about the work site. Is it leaning towards where someone will be working, like I said, and adjust for slope a little bit? You know, where is the tree on the slope above you? Check for rooting problems. So you want to make sure, are the roots not damaged? How shallow is the soil? Certainly where I grew up in Ontario, a tornadic storm came and knocked down like every tree for several kilometers around our hunting camp. And that's because the granite, the soil is like this. So any tree that didn't get ripped up by the roots was snapped right in half. And that's once you get 120 kilometer plus wind, those kind of things start happening as you get higher and higher up from there. Wet soils, shallow soils, cracked or lifting root mats. So it's like, is, the root mat's like this, but it's, you push on the tree and it's like, I don't know if the roots are really that connected to anything anymore, and if it's, in terms of leaning, like some trees grow awkward reaching for the light, and they're strong and solid. So you got to identify the difference. Like, why is the tree leaning? That's, is it a recent phenomenon that this tree has just started to slowly give, or is it a case of a tree that's literally grown or had some, when it was very small, had some, it's called a J sweep, right? But so it had some breakage in the trunk when it was just a tiny tree, and then it grew kind of awkward, and it's solid, but it's, it's like your own bones and mass getting scar tissue. It's never going to be the same. So the lifting root mat we were talking about, and if there's visible damage and decay of the roots, especially if, there's 3 or 4 roots on a spruce tree and 2 of them are burnt out, that tree is going to fall every time. Especially because the spruce doesn't have the tap root, affecting more than 50% of the lateral roots. So dig around, poke with a knife, they say. I like the sharp end of my files for my chainsaw, because you can they're deep enough and you can poke in there. No, don't use the filing end, because then you have dirt in your file. So here's your tree class. Class 1, live and healthy. It's got no decay, no damage, no defects. It's a good tree. Here we have live but unhealthy is class 2. Internal decay, growth deformities, other structural damage. It has stem damage maybe, or broken limbs, dying, broken top. It could be anything that might be giving it a sign that it is a dying tree. It's number 3, dead. Recently dead. Needles or fine twigs are present. You can tell often if they're recently dead, if the needles are still on the tree, if they're red. So during the pine beetle, you saw red everywhere, but then eventually the red all fell off onto the forest floor. And now it's just a bunch of dead and gray looking trees. So more like number 4, no needles, twigs, 50% of branches lost, only larger limbs remain. Spongy, dead. Number 5, most branches and bark are absent. There is a bit of internal decay. This one here, number 6, approximately 2/3 of the original height. So very little branches or bark. Sapwood or heartwood is sloughing off from the upper bowl. The decay is advanced. Lateral roots of the trees are just softening. You probably could push it over. Maybe it's now half its original height. You're getting to class 7, 8, 9. Extensive decay. Outer shell may be hard until, well, there you go. Number 9, it's on the ground and it's a bunch of rotting stuff. A wildlife tree is a standing tree with a special characteristic that provides valuable habitat for an animal. These characteristics are typically the defects we've just identified. So that means that sometimes your danger trees are going to be prime animal habitat. So if it's unusually tall or old compared to everything else around it, that's probably going to be one that eagles and hawks and things like to land in. Rare species for the stand too. You don't want to go and it's like, well, this is a danger tree, I think, but it's also very rare. So you got to fill out your card. That's the one thing about being a danger tree assessor, is you get that card out and always be staring at it, and you document what, it's important for liability reasons, but it can help you make your decision as well, right? So you look at everything afterwards and like, okay, maybe that tree isn't as bad as I thought it was. For your level of disturbance, for how, what are you going to do in the area? Is the tree safe for that job? Did you identify a defect on the tree serious enough to make it a hazardous tree? Would you feel comfortable working underneath it? Would you feel comfortable asking someone else to work underneath it? And that's something that's key as a DTA. Whenever I think that there's even a question, especially in my ITF crews where there was 2 DTA, sometimes 3, we'll go and do that job, and you guys stand back and watch our 6s, And so in a case of where it was like a hot spot that was a matter of 5 minutes to hit, we're not going to go and do a whole assessment and call the fallers in to come and nail that tree down and waste a bunch of time and resources, when the truthful thing is that 2 or 3 of us DTAs can go and deal with it quickly, safely, with our heads up, get it done, make sure everyone else in our crew is safe. Now, that's not something that they'll tell you in the class, but I mean, that's how it ends up working on the fire often, right? So if you're going to go and scout an area, get the DTA to do it, for example, too. So DTAs, don't answer this question. Would you feel comfortable working underneath it? Because you might have a different standard. Would you feel comfortable asking someone else to work under it? That's the number one key, right? Is everybody else. Don't think about your own self and what you are personally comfortable with, and how aware you are, and how much. That is not what it's about. It's about everybody else. So you can flag the trees as hazardous, and then you can decide what to do about the hazard. So maybe you'll get a tree faller to come in and knock it down. Maybe you'll just decide not to work there. I love making no work zones because falling is dangerous and time consuming, just like I just said. And sometimes there's a fire with 15 crews on it and there's only 1 or 2 fallers, and you have the poor faller running around all day, falling this tree for that crew and this tree for that crew. And the truth is, you're exhausting your faller for, when something serious might come up, your faller has now got blisters on his feet because he's been running around doing odd jobs for the last 4 days, right? So you want to manage everyone else's exhaustion as well. If falling is dangerous, you're putting the most dangerous thing that's going on is the guy cutting trees down in the fire, right? The tree fallers are the most likely person to get injured or killed on a fire in BC. So just because you've identified a hazard doesn't mean you need to, increase, like if the percentage is even very low that something bad could happen, the more you do it, the more likely that percentage is, right? So, if you can avoid falling the tree, that's great. If that means putting up some big no work zone flagging tape and just telling everyone in your crew, hey, like just stay well clear of that, and we're going to make our line do this. It's going to deviate a little bit so that we can just stay clear of those trees instead of having a nice clean straight line right through all the worst of the garbage. No, we're just going to adjust our line a little bit, try to keep it on, document it, make a map if you can, contact a faller. I'm pretty good at maps. People use Avenza now, so maybe you're just marking it in your Avenza and then you're handing the Avenza to I still like making hand-drawn maps. I'm old school. Don't stress about the card. The instructions are right there on the card in the book, right? So just be thorough as you can, and especially given the situation you're in, maybe the level of thoroughness can be mitigated. It's like we've been in an area where there was 6 of us DTAing a huge area and just calling out to one guy keeping score, 1 pine, 1 pine, 1 pine, and then after 15 pines, 1 spruce, right? So, and then we marked off like 40 trees in this huge area that we had to work in. And kind of, it was pretty obvious to the faller when they came through after us where all the trees we'd flagged were. So he never even saw a map from us. He was essentially 4 tree lengths behind us at any given time, following kind of our trail that we swept through. Draw a good map on the back, man. Take GPS coordinates, not if possible. This is the 21st century. Take GPS coordinates or take your Avenza coordinates, okay? Like there's no excuse now at this point. 2 years ago, yeah, it was all kind of new to us still, Avenza, but now we're getting to the point where like everybody's got it on their phone. Everyone knows how to do this stuff. You got to learn your mapping and orienteering on your own too. You can't come to a fire and learn how to read maps. You got 8 months of winter sitting around. Take some time on YouTube and learn about orienteering. Use heights of things to estimate tree heights and diameters. And maybe you even have a couple gadgets with you, like if you've done any amount of timber cruising. Final thoughts, situational awareness, right? So that's in capital letters from Nick right there, situational awareness. Every situation requires different, so you can't apply the same mentality to every situation. You have to look at every unique thing by itself. And so I always say to crews, no assumptions. And whenever I've made a mistake on fires, it's because I broke my own rule of no assumptions. Don't assume anything, right? Be aware of every little thing. And that's maybe my superpower. Even I sometimes and especially on day 12, when you've been working 12, 14-hour days straight, that situational awareness drops because your brain is becoming numb. And so live by the book, because you aren't always at your best. Flag lots, flag the starting point, flag the ending point, make a big gate with, and write on it, be descriptive, write on Sharpie, your call sign, your name, in the past, Tomahawk 1, Joe, the date, level of disturbance, like, well, we're gonna bulldoze a trail through here and have a whole hose lane and attack from here, so we better level 2 or 3, we gotta take it be real thorough. And anything you can do to identify which direction your DTA'd area goes. So that's the Danger Tree Ass micro course. So I hope everybody who might see this and come around a Wildfire, hello to you, hello to Nick who made this, he's a great boss, and hello to all my old friends at ITF. Still love you guys, and I hope this is helpful to all of you. And if you are thinking about becoming a BC Wildfire Ministry firefighter, good on you. That's beautiful. This is stuff that you'll want to learn in the future. If you want to be on a contract crew, this is stuff you'll want to learn. If you want to understand what we're doing out there, this is stuff that's good to understand. But even in your own property, looking around your house, and start to take into consideration danger tree awareness. Because how many times I've gone to people's properties and be like, wow, there's a big dead broken top on your house, and that's the direction wind comes from. Like, well, yeah, I know, but like, no buts. Deal with it. It has to be dealt with. Otherwise, someone could get killed or worse. Okay, that's all for me today. See you on the line, folks. Hit subscribe, like, share, and tell a friend, and help me keep growing this channel. And enjoy the wonderful weather we finally got in British Columbia for a change. Woohoo!